On today's episode of the Teaching in Higher Ed podcast, number 138, Mike Caulfield prescribes a new digital literacy. Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential. Welcome to this episode of Teaching in Higher Ed. I'm Bonnie Stahoviak, and this is the space where we explore the art and science of being more effective at facilitating learning. We also share ways to increase our productivity so we can have more peace in our lives and be even more present for our students. Today's guest, Mike Caulfield, is currently the Director of Blended and Networked Learning at Washington State University, Vancouver. He's also the editor of the New Horizons column for the EDUCAUSE Review, and he was recently appointed the first Civic Fellow of AASCU's American Democracy Project. He has worked to construct collaborative, net-enabled learning environments for almost 20 years. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Mike, when I was reading your bio, your title struck me a bit. Director of Blended and Networked Learning at Washington State University. Could you talk a little bit about the networked learning part of it and when that entered into your role there and some of the things that sort of show up there that don't typically show up with people that don't have that in their title or their responsibilities?
Yeah, sure. So it's been in the title from the beginning. One of the things that I benefited from here was that they were putting together a new position. And so we had the option to shape the title, and initially the term was going to be just Director of Blended Learning. But, our aspirations are that it's not just that we're mixing, say, a bit of Blackboard with a bit of face-to-face. It's actually that we're using the web in new ways that help our students to become, whatever you want to call it. Connectivist, little mini connectivists running around, or networked learners, or people that use their PLN, however you want to phrase it. We want students to have experiences which don't only blend the digital and the face-to-face, but also introduce them to this idea of learning in the context of a network like the World Wide Web. How that comes in on a day-to-day basis, the truth is, I think, like a lot of people in my position, we'd love it if every person that walked in the door said, teach me more about this networked learning. In reality, what we're able to do is we're able to pick a few boutique projects that we push through each semester and try to push the boundaries of what we do in a classroom around these technologies. And that may be, anything from, we had a graduate project where we had students doing an annotated bibliography of public policy works and news items using Hypothesis. That was a fun one. So these sorts of things are stuff that we try and we learn from it, and we try to come up with better opportunities next time around.
I really appreciate when you talk about that. I know that even just being the person who does these interviews, I get overwhelmed sometimes thinking I couldn't possibly keep up with all the ideas. But then just that we're creating spaces in our own lives and our own careers, and then trying to help our institutions do that too, where if we leave ourselves a little bit of margin for that experimentation, just how that can then almost cascade throughout the organization where everyone can be where they are, but be stretching themselves. So I love that inspiration you provide. And I'm going to really look forward to getting, if whatever links you have for those, we'll put them in the show notes too, so people can go explore and get inspired. There was one other thing that popped out in your bio before we actually talk about what we came here to talk about today. Okay. Like we don't have enough on our plates. So tell me about this Civic Fellow of the AASCU's American Democracy Project. That sounded really intriguing to me as well.
Yeah, so that's new. It's a new position. The American Democracy Project tries to set up educational experiences, civic engagement experiences at the higher education level. And it tries to do that through a variety of initiatives, right? So for example, experiential learning is a big piece of what they do, and service learning is a big piece of what they do, and organizing activities around Constitution Day, these democracy walls you see popping up on campus where various students are able to write their opinions about this or that and try to have a dialogue. So they do a lot of different things, and they have a variety of different projects that they pursue. A lot of those projects are very big. They have multiple schools in a formal organizational structure pursuing them. And one of the things that they've wanted to do for a while is, as well as doing some of those bigger projects around some bigger ideas, they wanted to have an ability to do smaller, more agile projects. So this idea of the civic fellow is the idea that they would pick somebody on a regular basis who could put together maybe a smaller, more agile project around a defined idea. And just given some of the concern around digital polarization and fake news and some of these issues around the election, they offered me a chance to be that first civic fellow.
Well, you brought up our topic for today, which is digital literacy. And I do like to admit, just right up front, that I am so excited to be talking to you, Mike, but also completely terrified in the sense of this is really hard work that you are proposing. And I'm going to start out right out of the gate. You wrote a blog post, which is going to be basically the frame for our conversation today. And the title of it is, Yes, Digital Literacy, but which one? And one of the first things you tell us is that most of the time when and I'm going to include myself very much in this, when I think about digital or information literacy skills, until I read your article, I did tend to think of it as a skill that would be pretty universal, that if we could take everyone across multiple disciplines and just raise the bar in this area, that we would be getting our jobs done. And I think that you are here to take me down on that one and take the rest of us down. So I love this. Talk to me in the beginning, just hear about how have we been wrong when we see it as a separate skill from domain knowledge?
Yeah, so there's multiple intersecting issues here, and we could drill down on any one of them. But we can start from what we do now, which is, when I say what we do now, I do know that some people read my post and said, well, that's not what we do. Mm-hmm. And that's true. But what the broad practice of information literacy, across the majority of schools, looks something like the stuff I talk about in that post, like the so-called CRAP test or RADCAB or CARS or some of these acronyms, where we have a student and they look at a page or they look at a tweet or they look at a document or a journal or something of that nature, and they have a list of questions to ask it. Usually there's 4 to 6 big questions they ask about accuracy and relevance and these sorts of things, and usually under each of those there's there's 6 or 7 sub questions. So you have all these questions that you're going to ask this article. And the idea is that students will sort of internalize these higher abstract ideas. And when they look at a page that's clearly, to us, a page that's not very trustworthy, or a page that's not particularly suited to what they're trying to prove or establish or figure out, that this understanding of these larger abstract issues will be so ingrained in them that they'll just see, oh well, this is not a trustworthy page, or this is a fact I should check. And in reality, that doesn't seem to happen. I actually got contacted after I wrote this by Sam Weinberg, who has been in the news with some of his Stanford work on this issue of digital literacy. And he's been in this area for, well over a decade and a half. And what they found is that, again, these sort of very broad general questions never actually translate into real world capabilities of students. That what we actually use when we evaluate information, are a lot of small, tricks, and these can be little things that we know, as I say in the article, or they can be little things that we know how to do. But it's those smaller things that really give us an immediate way to assess what's in front of us, and those are the things that we generally don't teach students.
One of the examples that you have in the blog post that you wrote, and again, to anyone listening, we'll have links to all of this in the show notes so you can go check it out, because this is a picture, so we have to close our eyes. You have 5 images of 5 different websites, and you put forth the challenge that says, okay, discern which one of these sources was the most careful with the facts. And I'm going to admit, I was reading late at night. That's my excuse. But I started to look for a lens very similar to the lenses that you described before. So I'm trying to figure out who is this. And that wasn't necessarily obvious in the images. And then I'm even looking at, the web design. Ooh, do you think that, this one looks more professional? The top one looked really... it was very text-based, so I thought, is that where he's going for? And then I just laughed, because when you keep reading, you go through a whole lens of some of the clues that stood out to you. And you talked about this, one of the images has a big W circled in the red flag. And I had no idea what this was. This was not something that stood out to me, but to you, you said, Nazis, Nazi warning, my bells are going off. And then there was another one. You saw the word Illuminati, and that got you thinking about New World Order. It must be, a conspiracy site.
Yeah.
And you had all these clues that, for the most part, were completely not noticeable to me. So just a perfect example I don't have the same domain knowledge that you had for these warning bells. And therefore, even if I have my acronym of crap or radcab or what have you, it's not going to do me any good, because I'm still not going to know the clues that stood out to you. Would you talk a little bit about the tree octopus one too? That was another one that comes up a lot.
So let's go back to something you said, though, because I think something you said is interesting here. So I go off of the cues that I know from my domain knowledge, and I was an online political organizer, way back about 10 years back. Created a online political activist site, 5,000 members. They got national attention, and we had a lot of people sharing a lot of information on that site. And so I've been immersed in online political culture for a long time. So the things that I'm going to notice there, like, Illuminati site, this is a New World Order conspiracy, Nazis. Those are not necessarily going to be the things that you're going to notice. But you said something there that was dismissive, but I think overly so, which is, you said, well, you're kind of looking at, what is the quality of the layout of the graphic, the graphic design of the site. And I think sometimes we dismiss that, right? We say, well, you can't really. But the truth is, if you are trying to figure out very quickly, do I trust this site or not? That is one of the things you might want to look at. And one of the reasons why you might want to look at this as just one of many factors, is that, an amount of care and an amount of money that goes into the site could show that the site is careful in other ways, right? Could show that the site, has a following that is substantial enough that they work to keep it. It could also be a completely horrible site and still be graphically, stunning. So this is not to say that you're proving one thing or another, but what we are looking to do is we are looking to, if you're familiar with Kahneman's System 1 and System 2, we're looking to actually inform some of those System 1 feelings, those gut instinct feelings that students have. Because ultimately, when you're scrolling through 10, 20, 30, 40 of these things, in a single pull to refresh on Twitter or Facebook or something like that, if you haven't developed an instinct for these things, you're gonna struggle, right? So we're looking for ways, whether it's domain knowledge, whether it's the background of the politics of this variety of sites that's out there, or, I don't know what your background is, but your ability to recognize, that certain site designs are a little more slipshod.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking for ways that people developed an instinct about these things, because once they get that instinct and once something in them says, oh, well, hold on here, danger, then they can start to apply what Kahneman calls system 2, right? That reasoned, rationed, step-by-step rationality we rely on, the analytical side of what we do. But if we're not having that gut feeling, when we first look at it, we're never actually going to get to the rationality. And it's actually that's the place where most people fail, right? It's not, we'll talk in a minute, I suppose, about strategies that people have to deal with these sorts of things. But the place that most people fail is they don't even think about it, right? Mm-hmm. They don't even hear the warning bells. So there's these two sort of broad issues. The one thing is, do you hear like the 3-alarm fire going off about this site? And do you recognize that and stop? And then there's having, heard that 3-alarm fire, do you have the tools to investigate it, right? Do you have the tools to pick it apart and figure out, okay, well, is this something trustworthy or not, right? And both halves of those are useful. Almost everything that we do in information literacy doesn't address that first part, though, and so we get a bunch of people that may actually have higher abstract reasoning skills, but are never actually going to utilize them on the things that scroll past them in their feed.
Part of what I heard you saying too is that, well, maybe I think you implied it, is that part of it is we have to care. Because the system 1 is, and for anyone, he's the wonderful book that talks about this is Thinking Fast and Slow. And the system 1 is just that instant without, that's my click word. That's my conditioned response. But in order to change that to better my own digital literacy, I have to care first. I can recall around Martin Luther King Day 3, 4, 5 years ago, something like that, I saw a quote on Facebook and, it's just so powerful. Click, share. And it turned out that was not something that was said by him. And I still remember so vividly being so disappointed in myself that now I am trained. Never share quote, no matter how beautiful the graphics are or how much it seems like something that Martin Luther King would have shared, unless you go and check it. In
particular, whenever you say, "Oh, that quote is perfect," that's precisely the time that you should stop, mm-hmm. right, and look at it. So, have I checked every quote that I've retweeted in the past, year? I'm not sure I have, but I have developed at least a reflex of, if I think a quote is perfect, right? If a quote is just like, this is the quote I've been looking for to express myself, that's actually when I get most suspicious. And the reason why I get most suspicious about that is, there's perfect quotes are viral, right? Mm-hmm. Virality is something that people seek to achieve. And so, when I see a quote that's almost looks like it's designed to go viral, that's precisely the quote that we should check, right? Because that's precisely the sort of quote that somebody would design as a hoax or as clickbait or something like that. And so part of it is rewiring yourself. If there's a quote about I don't know Roman Jakobson's poetic function from his 1963 speech, right? I'm not so worried. I'm not so worried about that, because that's not something that's sort of been designed to punch all my emotional buttons, right? Whereas if I do look at something and I feel like an emotional charge over it, I think that's the place where you most have to slow down, because again, you just got to be suspicious of those things.
There was a wonderful episode of the podcast Planet Money, and it starts out by the the author sharing that a few days before the election, we start getting all these thousands of people's things in our Facebook feeds, and that there was the story there. It was vivid, filled with intriguing details. And I'm reading now, there's a photo of a burning house, firemen rushing in. The headline read, quote, FBI agent suspected in Hillary email leaks found dead in apparent murder-suicide. And this episode goes through, and they actually were able to track down the individual who made quite a bit of money off of authoring fake news. And the guy was pretty hard to find, but once they found him, he, I think, decided that he was willing to share his story. And it just is a really, really fascinating look at some of the ways that people have been able to generate considerable income off of taking advantage of our System 1 responses and us not having a very good digital literacy. I know there's one that you can share with us that comes up frequently when talking about digital literacy, the tree octopus. Could you tell us that story?
Yeah. So, this is a great, if you put these two things together, the burning house with the murder suicide of the FBI agent next to the tree octopus, you start to understand like how ill-formed our activities are for students. So there's a site, this hoax site called the Save the Tree Octopus, and it's this fake site about this fake animal called the tree octopus, which looks just like a little mini octopus, but it supposedly lives in trees in the Pacific Northwest. And so teachers send their students. It's usually used in the K-12 area, but it's sometimes used in higher education as well. Teachers send their students to this, and they say, "Hey, is this real or is this fake?" Right? And they go through they go through RADCAB. They say, is this relevant? Is it accurate? Is it recently updated? All these sorts of questions. Or they go through crap, and they say, well, is it credible? And is it what's the purpose of it? And is there bias and so forth? And at the end of it, an awful lot of them, in fact, in a lot of studies, at least two studies I've read, the majority of students think it's real, even after sitting there with these questions right in front of them and going through the questions, it's like, well, yeah, it's updated. It was updated just a couple days ago. Is it relevant? Yeah, we want to know about the tree octopus. Does it seem to be, authoritative? Well, it links to something called the Cephalopod News Organization or something. And so, they do all these things around information literacy. And we're like, well, how can this happen? How can they believe in this tree octopus? Well, it's interesting because we're developing that opinion of their research, having never actually looked at this page in this way or done it. The thing that we react to is the fact that if there was a evolutionary separation between an octopus in the ocean and something that came on land that was amphibious, over time you would expect these two things to look vastly different, right? We don't have a bunch of fish with feet walking around on land. That's not how evolution tends to work, right? You tend to form to the environment. So the idea that there's this, precise replica of an octopus hanging around in Pacific Northwest trees is just ridiculous, right? But we say, we step back and we say, that's not information literacy, right? That's not an information literacy approach to it. And it's like, yes, it is. Of course it is. Information literacy is applying what you already know to new information that's coming in. And yet we get back and we abstract it into this set of rules that we believe that we can use without having any domain knowledge about these things that we're looking at, right? Without having any sense of who the authorities in this area are, or what we expect evolution to look like. And then we're surprised when people make just, completely ridiculous decisions on whether something's authentic or not. But they're making it based on, we don't, after a certain amount of time, you have to look at that and you say, well, are the students, just particularly dumb in every study after study? Or could it be that these questions are not really that useful for figuring these things out. So the murder suicide is an interesting one as well, right? So you have this person who puts up this murder suicide thing. His original work was he used to put up what he thought were kind of satirical sites, right? But he started to notice when he put up these sensational headlines that were just sort of bad satire, that people didn't recognize it was satire. I think partially because he wasn't a particularly good satirist. But then when he put this stuff up, people came and they clicked on it, and he made a lot of money. Now, how do we know that there's that there wasn't really this murder suicide and so forth? Well, that's a little harder. The site in that case was labeled the Denver Guardian. It looked like a news site. But one of the things you should recognize is, wow, this is actually a pretty extraordinary claim, right? I mean, it's not precisely the tree octopus, but saying that one of the candidates implying one of the candidates has colluded in the possible murder of an FBI agent and his wife, that's pretty big news. So you might want to slow down a little before you repost that, right? Now, if you did slow down a little, what you would find out is as you clicked around on that site, you just go to that site and look at something other than that page, and you click any other section of that site. It looks like there's a bunch of sections on that site. In fact, this is the only news story on the site, right? So all you had to do, right, was slow down and then say, well, let me just see what else is on this site. Is this really a local site? But people didn't slow down. Well, why didn't people slow down? For whatever reason, over time, they've become so used to some of this conspiracy theory in their feed that this they were kind of like the students with the tree octopus, right? They don't have enough sort of grounding in the reality of this, that they're going to stop and they're going to look at this, right? I mean, I know that sounds harsh, but I'm not blaming necessarily people that reposted that story. I think what I'm saying is that the problem with people that reposted that story wasn't necessarily that they didn't go and do radcab or they didn't go and do crap on the story. The big problem with that story is that their alarm bells should have been going off about the level and size and scope of this story, and it didn't, or it didn't in the right way, right? So it's that level of gut instinct. Now, if you understand that there are people out there trying to manipulate you, and that there's this universe of fake sites, and that they're all looking for your clicks so they can serve you ads, and they're all fighting for these headlines. If you understand that and you look at this, then maybe your gut reaction is, oh, this is a site trying to get me to click on it, right? And once you have that, you can kind of work with that, and you can, again, go into this system 2 behavior. But if you don't have that, you're like the students without any understanding of evolution. This just seems like a completely plausible thing. Sure, there's a tree octopus up there, and one of the major candidates just, murdered 2 people over an email server issue. So we have to look at these issues, and we have to we have to kind of de-abstract some of this stuff. And I'm not saying that you just have to have this encyclopedic knowledge of politics and evolution and so forth to debunk these things or to work effectively on the web. But I am saying that you do, if you don't understand that there are fake sites out there that are looking to do this, to get you to come to them and to promote them, that you maybe are going to have the wrong gut reaction to seeing a headline like that, right? I think over time, we can get our students, when they see a headline like that, to really react in a way that is not cynical, but has the appropriate level of reservation around it.
One of the common responses that I've seen on Facebook, for example, when someone will correct someone else, the classic, I'm posting this message on my status to let Facebook know that I own all my photos and I have copyright. Those are the classic thing. Someone links to the Snopes article that debunks that myth. And then there isn't really the response that I ever see of, oh my goodness, like me with the MLK quote, I was so embarrassed and corrected it and disciplined myself to always go system 2 on any quotes because I'm overly, cautious on that, as I should be. I want to be a source of reliable information as a professor and then just as a person, as a human being, to contribute to a better society. How do we get our students, how do we get our peers, how do we increase the care to want to be digitally literate?
Yeah, and how do we negotiate that tricky social situation too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's one of the biggest problems. So first things first, we know from research, it's Facebook sponsored research, but it is research across millions of articles or whatever, that when people post a Snopes link in a Facebook post thread, that the story has a much higher percentage chance of coming down, right? So people actually do react to the Snopes link, often with taking the story down, and that actually does help prevent the spread of the story. And I think the same thing ends up being true of PolitiFact and some of these other things.
I'm so glad to hear that. I had no idea. Sorry for interrupting you, but I'm no. Hooray! This is great news.
So when you do link the Snopes article, the research says across an insane amount of interactions that you are helping. You are helping stop the spread of this. There's a bigger chance that this person will take it down. Now, that chance is not 100%, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not even sure it nears 100%, right? But there's a statistically, there's a larger chance, both in terms of statistical significance, because it's across 1 million or whatever interactions, but also because it's a fairly large effect size. So when we look at that behavior is actually what we want to promote. We want to promote people linking to the Snopes page, linking to the PolitiFact page. And we want people to feel invited to do that. But you're right. I mean, socially, it's very hard to do that. And very often the person that's posting the thing, they found the Martin Luther King quote and they liked what it expressed and they posted it to express it. And to a certain extent, part of them just reacts, well, I don't even care if Martin Luther King said it. That's not the point.
Yeah.
The point is that this quote is true. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, but it kind of is the point, right? I mean, because if it wasn't the point, there wouldn't be a picture of Martin Luther King behind it. And also just out of respect to Martin Luther King and his work, we shouldn't be like, just routinely trashing his history with things he didn't say. So how do we go about that? And how do we create the social environment that actually tolerates this behavior? I think, again, this is a place where education can help. I think if we all see ourselves in this way, if we all see ourselves engaged in this effort to try to keep our news feeds clean of the sort of garbage that can invade them, I think we're less likely to react negatively to that. I mean, we are embarrassed, but we do have to do that. One of the things that people should do, is people should remember that you don't have to out people publicly. If you're on Facebook and you can, DM that, use Messenger to get a person that message, that's probably the better thing. Allow the person to save face and take it down themselves. I will say one other thing, which is that I believe organizations like Snopes and like PolitiFact or Fact Check or these various, or SciCheck is another one. I think they perform a really important function in this, in that certainly they're much maligned and people contest whether they're as objective as we would like. Everybody has a problem with at least one PolitiFact ruling, I'm sure, if you followed it for any time. But what they do give us is they give us a way to have those conversations, right? To start those conversations and move it beyond. If you just say, I don't think Martin Luther King said that, and here are 18 links that you can kind of piece together and analyze yourself to see that probably once you work this all out, he didn't say that. Well, now it's just you and me arguing, right? I mean, that's going to put us in the wrong mode. I do think that these sites like Snopes and like PolitiFact are going to play an increasingly important role in this, because they give us a way to kind of depersonalize that conversation between us and get into our analytical mode instead of our fighting mode. And so one of the things I'm excited about is, as a civic fellow, we're putting together a student-powered Snopes. This is the idea, at least, that students will find different claims around the internet and work in a Snopes-like fashion to either prove them or debunk them. And again, the idea is not that you're going to convince 100% of the people that read your article on this or that claim. The idea is that by pulling all that information together and making an attempt to get above the rhetorical into something that is more descriptive, that you're giving people resources to help their friends, their peers, their colleagues be better netizens as well. Right. And so again, these sites act as the starting points of the conversations that we should have. And I actually think there's got to be a lot more of them. I would like to see a whole universe of these sites. I'd like to see more ones that zone in on a particular domain, the way that PolitiFact, I suppose, checks politics. But there's so many other claims out there, whether they're health claims or claims about science or claims about the economy, that really need the attention of people that maybe have some domain knowledge in that area.
Yeah. Well, this is the point in the show when we're going to do recommendations, and I'm going to give mine first, but also just tell you that there were a couple of things that you mentioned in your blog post that we could also use that we didn't have time to get to, but if you wanted to recommend some of those, but of course people need to go read your blog post too.
Okay.
So, I'm going to recommend actually This American Life episode that came out and was actually a repeat from one, or sometimes they'll switch out a story or two. It's from December 16th, 2016. And I'm going to play just the very beginning. And I want to warn people with, sensitivities about things that we tell our children, because this one is some literacy that sometimes we have our children lack. So here's a little clip from This American Life, Kid Logic.
Rebecca remembers exactly when she learned the astonishing truth. She was in second grade and ran into her best friend Rachel at school one day.
And she pulled me aside and said, last night, I lost a tooth, and I woke up while the tooth fairy was putting the money under my pillow. And guess who the tooth fairy was? I said, oh my God, who was it? I have to know. And she said, my dad. My dad is the tooth fairy. And I remember running home after school and telling my mom, I know who the tooth fairy is, and declaring it as if I had grown up, that I knew who the tooth fairy was. And she said, oh, well, who is the tooth fairy? And I turned to her and I said, Rachel's dad is the tooth fairy. Ronnie Loberfeld is the tooth fairy.
That's just the beginning. You've got to go to listen to more of it. It's a wonderful episode of kids who have misunderstood things. And I will admit that I tend to play it pretty safe on this show. I don't say a lot of controversial things, but here goes. Here's my warning. My husband and I do not plan on telling our children that there is such a thing as a tooth fairy. And I apologize if that offends you, but it's one of those things that we like to think about with our kids, that when we tell them things like this, and again, we're not going to judge any of you who that's your thing, but for us, we want to sort of contribute to their own literacy and thinking. And I'm having fun with my son, who's 4.5 now, just talking to him about what is real and what is imagined and what is symbolic, and just trying to teach him what those things mean. And he's pretty darn good at discerning those things at a young age. And I think one of the things things is that we just watch out to any parts that we as parents might be doing to contribute to that. But anyway, even if you don't agree and you want to tell your kids that there's such a thing as a tooth fairy in this world, it's still a really fun episode to listen to. And I just found myself smiling so much that my cheeks hurt. So that's my recommendation for today. And I'm going to pass it over to you, Mike.
Well, the tooth fairy thing, I don't remember being shocked finding out my parents were the tooth fairy. I remember being shocked that my mom had kept all the teeth. They were like in like a little jar. And like, and like, so this just seemed to me, this was like, I don't know, this seemed like Roman or something, just like a jar of teeth. But, her feeling was, well, it just seemed weird to throw them away, and it's like, well, the tooth fairy thing, that, the fact you guys are the tooth fairy, that's not freaking me out. No, the jar of baby teeth in our cupboard, though, that's a little Dahmer, so, might want to back off of that.
It's funny that you bring that up because, of course, it's always, as a parent, you're thinking about things in advance often of when they actually happen. But this is something I didn't even think about. What do you do with those teeth?
Yeah, what do you do with the teeth? Yeah. So in any case, but for folks out there, whether you, engage in tooth fairyism or not, that's great. But like, don't keep a jar of teeth in the medicine cabinet. That's just freaky.
My parents do search and rescue with their dogs. And I'm laughing because as I'm saying this to you, I'm realizing what you do with them is you give them to your parents because they use them as scent articles for the dogs as they go out to find.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, that's what you do with
grim.
the teeth. I know it's really, this is another embarrassing confession, then I'll stop. For Easter many years, I wouldn't see my parents because they would be doing cadaver Easter egg hunts with the dogs. There's a synthetic scent for dead body smell, and they'd put it inside Easter eggs, and the dogs would go find them.
Oh my gosh!
I'm wondering if
I feel like believing in the tooth fairy was not the worst of your childhood issues.
Yes, perhaps.
I think like there's a whole other universe of things to work out there.
Yes, there's a lot we're unpacking on this episode.
My recommendation, I think this is a new find of mine, the Verification Handbook. This is, if you go to verificationhandbook.com, the European Center for Journalism, something like that, put out this handbook. And what it is it's a handbook for journalists that when news breaks and there's sources online, right? So a video pops up that's supposedly a video of some incident that happened at a rally or something like that, or a news story is popping up, or people on Twitter are talking about an earthquake or something like that. How do you quickly verify the stuff that comes to you through your feed in the digital age, right? And what I love about the Verification Handbook is it's just so specific about the stuff. So this is the polar opposite of the crap thing that people use with info-literacy or the RadCab or cars or any of these other models, because you'll look in this book and it will say, okay, you have a video, it takes place at a certain time. Here's how you find out what the weather was in that place at that time, so you can determine, whether the weather in the video matches what you should be seeing, right? So that's just one thing, if you here's it goes through things like using EchoSec, using Google Street View to verify locations. If someone says that there is this event that happened at this or that location in Ridgefield, Washington, well, here's one thing. Does that location actually exist? And using Google Maps to do that. And it goes through and just comes up with so many neat tricks of the trade that I hadn't really thought about. In a world where we're all kind of forced to be our own fact checkers, I just think it's an incredibly neat resource. I also think that in comparison to some of these other higher level approaches, it's just fun. It's just fun that you look at this and you're like, I'm going to find out if the weather in this video matches the weather that we know was happening at that place and that time. It feels like detective work. It feels a bit like a game. And so verificationhandbook.com, full of all these neat little tricks that the pros use and that you can use on the stuff that you see in your own feed.
Oh, it looks so good. I can tell I'm going to be getting lost in there in a good way in the coming weeks to really try to boost mine up. I just appreciate so much you spending your time with us today, and especially just the way in which you speak about this. Yes, we need to help our students get better at this, but I'm really hearing such a voice from you that it's a process that we all need to be continually going. And even as you were describing the verification handbook, just that's for you another way that you can exercise those muscles and be continuing your own path of domain knowledge.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Thank you so much for being a guest on Teaching in Higher Ed. I hope it's just the first of many, because it's been such an energizing and informative talk.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I'm happy to come back sometime.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Teaching in Higher Ed podcast. And thanks also to Mike for being such a funny, engaging, challenging in the best way possible guest. I really appreciate it. And thanks to Hoda, who is a former guest who recommended Mike, and she said that Mahabali had also suggested him. So what a wonderful resource he is to us. If you'd like to make any comments on today's episode, you can do that at teachinginhighered.com/138. Feel free to join us on the Teaching in Higher Ed Slack channel if you want to have some more private conversations about the things that come up on episodes or that are just of concern to us in higher ed. You can join at teachinginhighered.com/Slack. There's a quick form for you to fill out and we'll get you added to the community. And if you have yet to rate the show, this would be a wonderful time to do it. That just helps expand our community even more and keep great guests like Mike coming into our ecosystem so we know about them and more people know about the show. You can do that using whatever podcast service it is that you use to listen to the show. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.